So last week when I made the case that Bernie Sanders is the better candidate when it comes to LGBT rights, I actually got a lot of pushback from Clintonistas who tried to convince me that Bernie Sanders is actually not just bad on LGBT rights, he's actually hostile according to some articles. So I'm going to go ahead and review the arguments in question, and then I'll tell you whether or not you've changed my mind. So let's get to an article by Slate. I think that they do a good job of summarizing all of the articles that attack Bernie Sanders for his LGBT rights record. So it's titled, Bernie Sanders Claims He's a Longtime Champion of Marriage Equality. It's Just Not True, by Mark Joseph Stern. All right, bring it on. So he states, Sanders is not quite the gay rights visionary his defenders would like us to believe. Sanders did oppose DOMA, but purely on states' rights grounds. And as recently as 2006, Sanders opposed marriage equality for his adopted home state of Vermont. The senator may have evolved earlier than his primary opponents, but the fact remains that in the critical early days of the modern marriage equality movement, Sanders was neutral at best and hostile at worst. Okay, so that's a jump. He was hostile at worst. So let's keep that word in mind, hostile. And then towards the end of this segment, we'll go ahead and review whether or not he was hostile towards us. Now, thankfully, I don't have to refute that states' rights point because Stern actually does that himself. He literally refuted his own argument in his own article. Not joking. So he says, perhaps Sanders' team used this states' rights rationale to limit backlash from anti-gay voters. That would be a perfectly acceptable tactic since his vote, not his explanation of it, is what matters most. Still, if that's the case, then Sanders should be honest about it. Well, it turns out that Sanders was being honest about it. His wife said, we felt we needed to say it was states' rights because we wanted to stop the bill. That was an argument that we thought could maybe appeal to some Republicans who talked about states' rights. So there you have it. Are you satisfied? Not yet. So he continues. In 2006, he took a stand against same-sex marriage in Vermont, stating that he instead endorsed civil unions. Sanders told reporters that he was comfortable with civil unions, not full marriage equality. To justify his stance, Sanders complained that a battle for same-sex marriage would be too divisive. Now notice how he puts comfortable in quotation marks, and then he directly quotes him, but then he puts words in Bernie Sanders' mouth to suggest that he was not in favor of full marriage equality. That's really clever, but I see what you're doing. Now, this is true that Bernie Sanders did say he didn't want to push forward with marriage equality because it would be too divisive, but what Stern doesn't tell you is why Bernie Sanders said this. So he said this because they fought a long and hard battle to secure civil unions. So Bernie Sanders wanted to stick with civil unions because he thought that pushing forward with marriage equality would be too divisive and potentially undo the progress they made with civil unions. Now, in spite of this fact, there's another inconvenient truth here that Stern leaves out. Bernie Sanders, even though he was pushing for civil unions over marriage equality, he still simultaneously supported marriage equality. His choice not to pursue it was a practical decision because he didn't want to undo the progress. I think this is reasonable. But he continues, as mayor of Burlington in 1990, Sanders told an interviewer that LGBT rights were not a major priority for him. Asked if he would support a bill to protect gays from job discrimination, Sanders responded, probably not. Still, Sanders' exaggeration of his marriage equality record is strange and unwise. If Sanders were honest about his evolution, and yes, it was an evolution, then he could still brag about supporting marriage equality long before his chief primary rival. Instead, he has attempted to reframe his somewhat tepid support as vociferous and unabating. Now, it doesn't matter what Bernie Sanders was quoted as saying. I don't care if Bernie Sanders said LGBT rights weren't a major priority, because what I care about is the fact that he put his own career on the line to designate a gay pride day in Burlington, Vermont. He put his own career on the line to actually fight for housing anti-discrimination clauses for the LGBT community. And the fact that the city council was unequivocally against Bernie Sanders and they wanted to destroy him because of these LGBT protections, that proves to me that he was willing to fight for us even when it was a difficult thing to do. So I can forgive Bernie Sanders for not talking the talk in the 1990s because he walked the walk for us. Words don't matter as much as actions does, and his actions dictated that he was unequivocally in support of us at a time when everyone else hated us, when everyone else was hostile towards the notion of LGBT rights. So I'm sorry that you think it's irrational for him or wrong for him to try to protect himself against the backlash from city council because they wanted to go after him for supporting us, but I don't care what he said. I care about what he did. Now, when it comes to his exaggeration on his record, there's one tiny problem with that. He did endorse marriage equality as early as the 1970s. So he wrote, "Let us abolish all laws which attempt to impose a particular brand of morality or right on people. Let's abolish all laws dealing with abortion, drugs, sexual behavior, adultery, homosexuality, etc." Now, you don't have to read that as an endorsement of marriage equality as I do, but in 1996, the fact remains that he voted against DOMA, while Hillary Clinton didn't oppose it until 2007, and she actually was on the Senate floor defending our exclusion from the institution of marriage. She fought against LGBT rights. Now, I want to read you a quote that Politifact had fact-checked of Chuck Todd. He states, "Bernie Sanders was there when it came to same-sex marriage 20 years ago. He was there when it wasn't popular," and Politifact rated this claim true. So even if you don't take that initial quote as an endorsement in the 1970s of marriage equality, you gotta take 1996 as his endorsement of marriage equality. That's 20 years ago, still leagues ahead of everyone else in Congress. So I want to get back to that hostility comment. So at what point in all these quotes, in all of these actions, in all of these said anti-gay things that Bernie Sanders did, was he being hostile towards the LGBT community? Where was the hostility? I don't see it. I do see Hillary Clinton being hostile. I see her supporting our disenfranchisement from marriage. I see her trying to kick us out of the military and supporting Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Why isn't Hillary Clinton held up to the same standard? She was actively fighting against us. I'd call that hostile. I wouldn't call Bernie Sanders hostile towards the notion of LGBT rights. That's absurd. But here's the deal. I'm going to go ahead and go out of my way and be as fair to you as I can possibly be, Stern. So let's actually take everything you said here and let's actually just say that Bernie Sanders factually did not care about LGBT rights. That's not true, but let's say he did. Let's say that he actually actively opposed marriage equality all the way up until 2009. Let's just accept this hypothetical situation as true for a moment. So even then, if you got that picture in your mind, right? Bernie Sanders, 2009, doesn't care about gay people, didn't endorse marriage equality until 2009. Keep that picture in your mind. So even if that were true, when you compare Bernie Sanders to Hillary Clinton, who's the better candidate? It's still the case that Bernie Sanders is the better candidate than Hillary Clinton by a mile, because this might just be me. I could just be insane, but someone just being neutral or not caring about LGBT rights is better than someone actively fighting against our rights, which Hillary Clinton did. So here's what I'm being asked to do as a gay person. I'm being asked to fall in line, to just support Hillary Clinton because the establishment and Hillary Clinton herself are trying to tell me that she's the better candidate, someone who actively fought against our rights up until 3 years ago. She's better for me. She's going to fight for my rights. I was born at night, but I was not born last night, and I am not that naive. So, no, I'm not going to fall in line. It's still very much the case that even though the media tries to disparage his record on LGBT rights, he was pro-gay for the entirety of his career. Now, there's a reason why the couple who was involved in the Supreme Court marriage equality case actually endorsed Bernie Sanders. They got common sense. It's because he was on our side from the beginning. Okay, Bernie Sanders was there for us when everyone else hated us. Check the record. Hillary versus Bernie Sanders. It's very, very clear. So when it comes to the article title, Bernie Sanders claims he's a longtime champion of marriage equality. It's just not true. Actually, it is true. It is true. Regardless if you want to believe it or not. So I have facts on my side. So you can support the candidate who just warmed up to the idea of marriage equality a couple of years ago. But I'm going to go with the guy who's been fighting for us since before I was born. I'm going to go with the guy who almost destroyed his career when he was mayor of Burlington, Vermont, fighting for us. So I'm sorry you did not convince me. Bernie Sanders is still very much the better candidate when it comes to LGBT rights by a mile.